Welcome to REM Award, the podcast that explores the secrets of sleep and psychology. I'm your host, Ryan, and in each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of sleep and other topics such as mental well-being and personal growth. If you want to unlock your full potential and receive the rewards that come with understanding the power of sleep, you're in the right place. To discover more tips and insights on improving your sleep and overall well-being, visit our website and explore our other episodes at remaward.org. All right, let's jump right in. For my first question, in your article, there's a better way to wake up. You say our circadian system is trying to predict the regular changes in our day. Can you explain how our body does that and why waking up at different times makes us feel worse?
Yes, so this is a good question. It's a little complicated, so I'll try and break it down. But obviously, from a circadian perspective, we're aware that our entire physiology has evolved in a 24-hour light dark cycle. And as part of that evolution, we have our own little internal clock, our circadian pacemaker in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nuclei. And it's running not a precise 24-hour period, but pretty close to that. So it's running its own internal cycle, and ideally is in synchrony with the external 24-hour light dark cycle. And that's mostly through light is the strongest signal that keeps us, as we say, entrained to the external light dark cycle. So there are some significant advantages to having this circadian system because obviously there's predictable changes that happen every day. There's the sunrise, there's the sunset, all of those changes are pretty predictable. So our circadian system allows us, or essentially starts to modify our physiology in anticipation of some of these known events that are going to occur. And I guess the classic example for me would be our core body temperature rhythm. So we go to sleep at nighttime and our core body temperature drops. Part of that is because we're asleep, but it also has a very strong circadian influence. And then while you're sleeping away, about 3 hours before you normally wake up, the circadian system is anticipating, oh, you know what? Morning is coming, wakefulness is coming, and it actually starts to increase your core body temperature. So when you do
Mm,
wake up 3 hours later, you're kind of in this optimal state to start the day.
right.
And the technical term for this in the field is called predictive homeostasis. So we often think of homeostasis as with our thermal regulation, for example. We get too hot, our body kicks in to cool us down, bring us back to a set point. Predictive homeostasis is more, I'm predicting ahead of time what's going to happen so that I can try and optimize how we are when we get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
And
sense.
I guess in terms of um, I mean, when all of that goes wrong, the classic example would be jet lag, right?
Right.
We're not sleeping well because we're no longer sleeping at optimal circadian time, at least while the clock is adjusting. Our mood tends to be worse because there's circadian rhythm and mood as well. Some of us will start to experience, gastrointestinal upset because now we're not at the optimal circadian. So jet lag is sort of the classic case where all of a sudden
Hmm.
people realize like, oh, this is how much my circadian system normally helps me today because when it's not helping me, I start to feel all these ill effects.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people listening can have really experienced that jet lag effect. And you also say morning light is the most beneficial for us. What makes morning light so powerful, especially compared to like indoor lights?
So I think there's kind of three factors that feed into why morning light is the most important light. One is the timing of it. So again, our circadian system responds to light. And it's kind of fascinating that you can be exposed to precisely the same sort of light pulse, but your clock could have a completely different response to it depending on when it receives that light. So you're probably aware that light in the few hours before we go to bed is usually light we're trying to minimize because that
Hmm.
light actually will push the clock later. The clock after sunset, any light that we receive, our internal clock is thinking like, oh, the day's continuing. It's processing that as part of an increase in the day length. So it's thinking, oh, I should be shifting later. And so it interprets that light as as meaning that it needs to shift later. Morning light, on the other hand, reinforces, oh, it's the morning time, and it will shift the clock earlier. And most of us in modern society are what we call a little delayed. Our clocks are running a little late. So that big pulse of light in the morning is exactly what we need to kind of get us more in synchrony with that external 24-hour light dark cycle. It has its own natural antidepressant effects, which is
Mm.
great. But it's the timing of the light. Um, Generally speaking, the intensity, the more intense the light, the more of an effect it's going to have. And usually, sunlight is more intense than indoor light. Although I would say, here in Michigan in the winter, if it's really cold, the last thing you want to do is go outside. So you can just sit near a big window and at least try and get some light that way. And then the third thing would be the wavelength. So morning light has some blue wavelengths of light. And though that's the wavelength that the circadian system is most responsive to. So again, we want more of it in the morning, but we want less of it in the evening. So morning light, I mean, I usually tell people, when I commute to work in the morning, even if it's bright, I typically won't wear sunglasses
Hmm.
because I'm like, you know what? I need as much of this as I can get.
That makes sense. And I assume like just out of assumption, like that's the reason why a lot of people wake up very tired if it's like a very rainy day or like it's very cloudy out, like the sunlight's kind of not helping them adjust or their circadian rhythm adjust. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's an immediate, we know light, whether it's indoor or outdoor light, has an immediate alerting effect. So definitely if it's a bright sunny day, you're going to feel more of
Right.
that. So there's the immediate effect, but then there's also the effect that kicks in sort of more on a day by day basis.
Got it. Makes sense. And moving along with that, sleep inertia is that groggy feeling we have after waking up. Can you just explain a little bit of why does that happen and how can we avoid it?
Yeah, so sleep inertia, I think, yeah, we've all definitely experienced it. And if you're a really regular good sleeper, if you've ever had the experience where you're probably aware that we have sleep cycles in 90 minutes, and so you
Hmm.
can fall asleep, and let's say an hour and a half into that sleep, the phone rings or something happens. Maybe the smoke detector goes off. I don't know, something happens, and all of a sudden you're awake. If you're coming right out of slow wave sleep, for example, and in some cases even REM sleep, particularly in that first part of the night where we tend to get most of our slow wave sleep. Yeah, I mean, we've all felt that. You wake up, you're kind of like, who am I? Where am I? What's
Right.
going on? That's kind of the peak of sleep inertia. It's not always that bad. There can be different degrees of it, but usually, if it's a significant amount of sleep inertia, it's a sign that something is disrupted with sleep. And that just could be rapidly changing schedules. It could be that you're not getting enough sleep. And if you're not getting enough sleep, then there's this sleep rebound where when you go to sleep, your body's going to try and recuperate, for example, some of the slow wave sleep. So you'll have even more slow wave sleep. And that's good, but it can also make you feel a little bit groggy if you
Right.
haven't quite recouped enough, but you're forcing yourself to wake up. Again, you'll feel it. It can be a sign of circadian disruption as well. Those are regular schedules where your sleep shifting around all the time. And when our sleep shifts around all the time, of course, it means our light exposure is irregular too. And that's a very
Hmm.
confusing signal to the clock. And then there's some drugs and substances. There's certainly some sleep medications that have hangover effects. A lot of those cold medicines, for example, that people will take. Many of us are kind of hit with that in the morning. We can feel some of those substances still in our circulation.
Right.
So for sleep inertia, really the best way to avoid it, and it's kind of boring, but A, get enough sleep. And for adults, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine recommends at least 7 hours a night. There's individual variability in sleep need. I think most of us have a sense of how much we need to feel really good the next day, but at least 7 hours a night, and on a pretty regular schedule. And that helps optimize our sleep. It helps stabilize our circadian timing, and it kind of sets us up to feel the best that we can feel, and it should reduce the sleep inertia.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And I think you touched a lot about it, but how keeping a regular sleep schedule really seems to be a big part of, feeling good, feeling alert and all that. But for people with unpredictable routines, like as you mentioned, shift workers or maybe some parents, what can they do to make up for their irregular schedules?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and definitely tricky. The shift worker one, we usually try and think of people in two different camps. Um, and one camp would be what we would describe as permanent night workers. So these are people that basically just do night shifts, and they might do 3 or 4 night shifts in a row and then have 2 or 3 days off, and then they're
Mm.
back on the night shifts. In that situation, we and others have done actually simulated night shift studies in the lab. We've shown that you can actually get people in what we call a compromised circadian phase position. So what this means is their clock does shift later, um, but it shifts later to the point where it's after their work hours, so it's in the morning. And then if they can go to sleep pretty soon after the night shift and sleep late, usually we would recommend till around noon, then that actually keeps their circadian timing in a phase that's good for when they're working, but also reasonably good for sleep on their days off. Now, this isn't for everyone. This works best for people on permanent night shifts,
Right.
people that don't necessarily have a lot of other daytime commitments. People with young families, for example, a lot of the time people say, well, I can't go home and go to sleep right after night shift. I've got to take the kids to school. In which case they're going to get a whole bunch of other light exposure that's going to kind of work against this. So ideally, people can get into this compromise zone for permanent night shift work if they're on rotating shift schedules. Um, there's really, from a circadian adjustment point of view, there's really not much that can be done with that because the
Yeah.
clock is like pretty slow to shift, shifting, at the most 1.5 hours a day. So for rotating schedules, usually the approach is just try and get people through it reasonably quickly. So maybe 2 or 3 shifts at the most on the morning shift, and then 2 or 3 shifts in the evening shift, and then 2 or 3 in the night, and just kind of try and move them through it so they're not spending too much time in these sort of adverse circadian schedules. For parents, yeah, that is definitely a tricky one as well. They say it takes a village for a reason. Usually it's trying to strategize with whoever else is available to help out, particularly with the young babies that don't even have an entrained circadian clock until, somewhere around the 3 month mark. Um, and so that's really usually the advice is try where possible to get at least 4 hours consolidated sleep. And if you're still obviously really sleep deprived, then we don't always encourage napping, but in this situation, we would encourage napping. But the idea is to try and tag team with others so that you have some protected stretch of sleep. 4 hours would be awesome. If it's only 3 hours, so be it. And you can try and get some of that consolidated sleep. And then the rest of the day, where possible, try and make up some of that sleep need through naps where you can. And, they always say when the baby naps, you should nap, which
Yeah.
isn't always easy to do when you're thinking of all the other things you have to get done. But yeah, definitely challenging for sure.
Got it. Well, it's still very helpful, and thank you for all that information. And you talked about a few substances like I know you're talking about like sleeping medication or no, cold medication. Can you talk a little bit about caffeine and how it affects our sleep and wake cycles? Can someone who regularly drinks caffeine be immune to caffeine related to sleep disruptions, or is that not a thing?
Yeah, so yeah, a few thoughts on this. One is I still remember in my early days when I was in the circadian field, this paper came out. Um, and yeah, everyone was sort of a little startled because essentially what they did in the morning is they gave people about 200 milligrams of caffeine, which is, probably pretty close to your standard cup of coffee. I mean, if you're going to Starbucks, you're probably getting even more than that, right, in the morning. So there's one drink in the morning, and then they wired them up and they measured their brain waves essentially that night. And sure enough, they found that one cup of coffee in the morning was enough to suppress slow waves in the beginning of the night, that night. So, any of us that use caffeine, including myself, I think there's a fair chance that our sleep is being affected. There's definitely individual variability in how people respond to caffeine, and that seems to be tied into genetic differences.
Right.
So, on average, caffeine has a half-life of around 5 hours. That's why it's somewhat difficult. It's in the system for a long time. But there's variation in that. So, some people will metabolize caffeine super quickly, and they're probably going to have an easier time. Others it will just be in the system for a lot longer.
Hmm.
And then there's genetic differences also in the adenosine receptor. So adenosine is a hormone that's basically, or brain substance that's basically increasing, is believed to not fully account for, but certainly help account for why the longer we're awake for, the sleepier we tend to feel. The theory is that adenosine is building up in our circulation in our brains over time. So caffeine works by blocking the adenosine receptor, and all of a sudden we feel more alert because we're not feeling all of that adenosine, right?
Right.
That's built up in the system. So there's some genetic variation in the adenosine receptors as well. I think conceivably, can someone be a high caffeine user um, and not feel the effects on their sleep and in other ways potentially because we do know tolerance builds up. But the usual recommendation is to try not to consume more than 300 milligrams a day. We know that there's other negative effects of caffeine. We know there can be cardiovascular effects and other
Hmm.
things. We know it increases anxiety. There's a whole bunch of other things it does. Of course, it's amazing to consume caffeine first in the morning. It's like we love it. Um, and I'm consuming my caffeine in the morning, but I will say I've cut down to just the one drink in the morning, and basically that's it, which makes the afternoons can be a little rough sometimes. But
Right.
so, yeah, so my advice was even if you feel like, oh, caffeine doesn't really affect me, honestly, the people that I know that say that are ones that are pretty heavy caffeine users, and it could just be part of the tolerance effect. And I'd be surprised if there's no effect at all on their slow waves. So if we're trying to optimize our sleep and optimize our health, then reducing the caffeine down to just morning use and a lower dose, I think is the way to go.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think that hits home for a lot of current day teenagers who
Yeah.
are very dependent on energy drinks, especially late
Yeah.
in the day. Oh, from what
Yeah.
I know in my school personally,
No,
but
for sure. Absolutely.
yeah, so it's very good to know limiting the caffeine and keeping in the morning. And talking about another substance, alcohol, which you've called the number one sleep aid, but not in a good way. How does it mess with sleep? And even if it helps people fall asleep faster?
Yeah. So, yeah, classically, alcohol was reported to be, survey data would suggest that it was the number one sleep aid that people would use.
Hmm.
So alcohol does help you fall asleep a little bit more quickly. And interestingly, in the first half of the night, it does actually increase slow wave sleep, which is sort of that deeper restorative sleep. But it also suppresses REM sleep. And as it gets metabolized and the alcohol clears your circulation during the night, in the second half of the sleep, you'll have a big REM rebound, and also have a lot of wakefulness will kick in. So you benefit for the first half of the night. The second half of the night is really greatly disrupted, and most typically people are feeling more fatigued in the
I
morning.
see.
Um, What's an interesting shift that's happening right now is us in the sleep field. We were always like, oh, alcohol's the number one sleep aid. But to be honest with you, I think cannabis is now in the race with
Yeah.
alcohol and may have even overtaken alcohol. There's very recent survey data that came out showing actually that has won the race in 19 to 30-year-olds,
Wow.
where I think it was a very high number. It was about 40%, I think, reporting to use cannabis for their sleep, and alcohol was actually a lot less. I'm thinking in the older populations, though, that may not be as open or interested in using cannabis. They're
Yeah,
probably still using alcohol, but I think there's this very interesting generational shift
For
happening
sure.
right now. But cannabis, we know less about the effects on sleep. Simply, I mean, first of all, it hasn't been studied for quite as long as alcohol, but also there's so many different combinations of the THC and the CBD. I think from a scientific point of view, it's been really tricky to study because there's so many different formulations out there. But generally speaking, it does seem to help people fall asleep a little bit more quickly, and it may also help increase slow wave sleep. Um, but actually, for alcohol and cannabis, we definitely know that tolerance develops. And what
Mm,
typically happens is people start using more and more and more with this idea of like, oh, I'm not quite seeing the same effects. And so I'm going to increase my dose, which leads down, the pathway of using more and more, which ideally we don't want people to do. And
right.
cannabis does appear to have some withdrawal effects. So if you've been using it over the long term, when you stop using or you start to peel back, you can actually see sleep worsen for a while. Um, and yeah, so generally speaking, we're not, yeah, I don't think there's anyone in the sleep field that's really recommending cannabis for sleep issues. Um, although, I would think every now and then is fine, but certainly not on a chronic basis, because in the end, you'll kind of end up in a worse situation than you were at the start.
Right. And I just had a quick follow-up question. What are your thoughts, or what studies, or is there not that many, on like sleeping pills or like melatonin? I know it's very popular among like youth and I guess in the general public.
Yeah, so melatonin, I should give a disclosure just anytime I talk about melatonin that I am a consultant for a company called Natrol that make melatonin, so just have to kind of put that out there. But melatonin can help your sleep. It's not a huge effect.
Hmm.
It's not kind of what you would experience with a prescription hypnotic. It's very well established that it will help you fall asleep a little bit more quickly. And it takes about half an hour to peak in your circulation. So you want to take it about half an hour before you would like to fall asleep.
Right.
And sometimes we call that riding the melatonin wave. You take it, you're feeling this uptick in melatonin, you want to catch the wave at the right time. So you want to be trying to fall asleep at that optimal time.
Right.
There's mixed results, and this could vary across individuals about whether or not melatonin helps you sleep for longer, but also if it's reducing the number of awakenings during the night. Some studies have found it does, some studies have found it doesn't. I think if people are using a formulation that's more of a slow release formulation, maybe you're more likely to see benefits across the night. But I guess there's another benefit that we don't really talk that much about in terms of sleep, which is melatonin, if taken regularly, can help provide that stable circadian um, signal to the
I
clock
got
and can
it.
help enforce a regular sleep schedule. But just while I'm talking about melatonin, people shouldn't start taking it without talking to their doctor because it can interact with other medications.
Hmm.
It does have some controversies associated with it. There's a lot of talk right now in the case of diabetes. It may or may not be the best thing to take. And there's been recent reports that I think physicians are a little shocked at all of these different supplements that people are taking, and most of the time people are not telling their doctors about them. Um, and you might have seen recent news on green tea extract, people taking super high doses of that. It turns out it can have some liver toxicity effects and all
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff. So people definitely need, number one, people have to talk to their doctor about it. Number two, it's a supplement. So this is one case where I would recommend spending money on the bigger brands because they usually have the budget to have their formulations independently tested to confirm that yes, that they're of good purity and accurate dose and all that kind of stuff. You're probably aware of some of the controversies around supplements, sometimes
Yeah.
containing things that they shouldn't and the dose isn't right. And so there's the NSF stamp and the USP stamp that you'll sometimes see on bottles, or you'll find them on companies' websites that show that yes, we're a company that will send formulations to an independent company to test and verify. And that's really what you're looking for. So that was a long answer, but the short answer is melatonin can help, but it's not a huge effect.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Talk about things that may impact sleep. I was curious about how exercise, which a lot of studies show they could help improve sleep. I was curious if you
Yes.
knew what kind of exercise is best, or is there an optimal time to exercise to help our sleep?
Yeah. So in terms of timing, it's funny because if you ask exercise specialists, what's the best time to exercise? They'll say anytime because people don't do enough exercise. They should just do exercise.
Right.
Um, so from a sleep perspective, we do know that if you engage in activities such as exercise, and this would be more cardiovascular exercise in which you see a temperature increase and your brain temperature is increasing, that can help increase slow wave sleep the following night. So I don't know if I think most people have probably experienced if you've engaged in some cardiovascular exercise, you will sleep that bit better the
Yeah.
following night. Part of it could be related to the brain temperature. And I remember old studies where they were first testing this out, where they had people not exercise, but they just put them under these hair dryers for a while with the idea they were going to warm up the brain. And I believe they showed more slow wave sleep. So that was kind of support for the argument
Wow.
that, yeah, some of it is a temperature effect. Um, and I think that's helpful for sleep. Usually the recommendation is don't do it too close to sleep because obviously it increases cortisol and stuff like that. And we don't want our bodies to be feeling too stressed before trying to sleep. I think other exercise, though, from perspective, can also be helpful. So we know a lot of people have difficulty winding down before sleep, processing some of the stresses of the day. So, there's yoga, for example, there's a pretty good literature showing yoga can improve sleep. And I think part of that is related to the stress management. Obviously, you can do vigorous yoga and break out in a sweat and all that kind of stuff. But I think part of it is the breathing regulation,
Right.
training oneself on relaxation and stress management, and that can also help. Um, yeah, so I think different types of exercise, generally different times during the day should be fine, not too close, the more energetic exercise, not too close to sleep. And then I guess the only thing that comes to mind with exercise is as a sleep person, I don't love the trend where people are forcing themselves up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym. I get it. They want to exercise. I get it. But there's so many downsides with not getting enough sleep. Yeah, it's definitely maybe not the best trade-off that way. So if there's a way to get enough sleep and exercise, then you're really setting yourself up well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's been a big thing, waking up extra early to kind of get the exercise in. So it's a great point to bring up. So those are all the long form questions I had. Now I just have a few rapid fire questions for you, for people to get to know a little bit about you, and I guess just some like curious questions that people may have. My first question is, how many hours of sleep do you usually get at night?
So I give myself an 8 hour sleep opportunity. And according to my Apple Watch, which isn't going to be super accurate, but gives you some idea, it's telling me I'm getting about 7.5, or 7.75 hours of sleep.
That's
So,
great.
yeah.
And do you usually wake up from an alarm clock, or are you a natural type of wake up person?
I set an alarm because I need to make sure that I'm up. But my alarm is actually just the vibration on my watch. So there's no sound. And usually, I would say most mornings I'm already awake when it goes off.
That's great to
Just
hear.
enjoying those last few minutes of freedom before I have to get up.
I could really relate to that. And I guess is snoozing the alarm a good or bad thing?
Generally, in the sleep field, we think it's a bad thing because constantly snoozing means that you're actually allowing your sleep to be disrupted. And we would prefer that you have one alarm um, and just sleep until that one alarm. We see in the sleep field, we see all these crazy things. People will come to us and they have multiple different alarms set. Sometimes people stagger their alarms, but that usually ends in disaster because one of the alarms will fail and then the second one goes off, but they think it's the first one. And so this whole staggering, crazy system of alarms in the morning just does not work. And people just need the one alarm. Um, And yeah, and if they really struggle to get up in the morning, it's probably a sign they're not getting enough sleep. But we sometimes use strategies where we have the alarm clock on the other side of the room and you have to get up out of bed to turn it off. That can be a big help.
Yeah, I've heard about that. And what are your thoughts on blackout curtains? Do they hurt or help?
Generally, I think they help because light at night is something that's being studied in the field and generally does not have good effects. I think the longitudinal studies have to come out, but right now in these cross-sectional studies, we know more light at night is associated with more depression, more weight gain, more inflammation, generally not good things. So blackout curtains can help, but of course you don't necessarily need them. You can adapt pretty easily to using a light mask, for example, if there's a lot of light. The only thing about blackout curtains that I don't love is it means you're not necessarily exposed to as much light in the morning.
Right.
And I kind of like the natural light cycle coming in the morning. Um, but certainly for people doing night shift work and having to sleep during the day, blackout curtains would be a must for them.
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
And do you think it's better to wake up to kind of sound or music, or is it way better to wake up in silence, or does that not really matter?
I think it's probably a personal choice. Um, I prefer to wake up gently and not have that, sudden rush of cardiovascular activity.
Yeah.
Depending on what's waking you up, but some of that, and you're like, oh, that gets me pumped for the day. But I would prefer to wake up gently. And actually, as with everything, there is a circadian rhythm in cardiovascular events. And not all there is an underlying circadian rhythm, but it's in conjunction with other things. And the morning time is actually a really risky time for heart attacks.
Really?
Part of it is the bursts of heart rate that occur and sympathetic activity that occurs in REM sleep, which is earlier in the morning. But then even after you wake up, it's a pretty big stress to the system after you've been lying down for so long to get up and wake up. And if there's already some vulnerabilities in the body, that can be a stressful time. So I would think adding a really loud, obnoxious alarm, is probably not helpful at that time. Um, but yeah, it's also personal choice, I think.
Got it. And if I guess you had to choose what's worse for your sleep, staying up too late or waking up too early?
I think staying up late is worse. Staying up late, you'll be exposed to light, which will push your clock later. And we know that that is depressogenic. Waking up too early, I guess if people feel that they're spontaneously waking up too early, we know that particularly as people get older, that that can be a sleep complaint. But generally, if you're waking up, if you force yourself up too early in the morning, it's not the worst thing in the world because you will get a lot of morning light exposure and that can shift you a little bit earlier, which again is something that most of us need to be better adapted. Um, so I know it feels so good. There's been interesting studies where they ask people to kind of rate the different times of their day and how much they value them. And the time of day that we all value so much are those evening hours
Mm.
because, we're like, well, we've done everything we needed to do, or school or work or whatever it is. And now this is my special time that I get to do, whatever I want. And so it's highly valued special time of the day. But I think we have to have just a little bit of self-discipline, just like we do in terms of, how much we eat and exercise and everything, and recognize this might feel great in the moment, but it's really going to come back and bite me tomorrow and the remaining days that it takes my body to recover from shifting later in response to that light.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And my last two questions, is it okay to sleep in on
Yeah.
weekends?
If you're really sleep deprived, I think yes. In a perfect world, in perfect world, you wouldn't really be too sleep deprived. So just for the pleasure of it, you could sleep about half an hour later. If you really have to, I would say an hour or so later. There
Mhm.
are studies suggesting if you're sleeping later than that, again, you're going to start to see some negative effects. So we would say, I think most people in the sleep field would say ideally you're not sleeping later than about an hour. And then another approach to take is take a nap in the middle of the day if you're still feeling a bit tired. Not too close to your nighttime sleep because then obviously you'll be less
Right.
sleepy at night. But yeah, sleeping, if you're normally up 6:30 for school or work and then sleeping through until um, you know, 10, 11, 12. That's a big insult to the circadian system. And actually, studies have shown just a 1 hour delay on the weekend, studies have shown it takes people till Wednesday morning to start feeling back on track.
Wow.
So they run in these interesting kind of double-blind placebo studies. They've had people follow a delay sleep schedule on the weekend. And in one condition, obviously their clock delays by about an hour, and then they look at how they're feeling in the morning. And then in the other condition, they followed the same sleep schedule, but instead of a placebo pill, they actually gave them some afternoon melatonin, which stopped their clock from delaying. So they've run through the same schedule. They and the researchers have no idea what's happening with their circadian clock. But
Mhm.
sure enough, in the morning, with their clock having not delayed, they're reporting a much better sense of well-being, just feeling a lot better. So we know it does unfortunately come and bite us if we sleep too late.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. My last question, what is one potentially easy change kids and teens can make tomorrow to wake up better?
Yeah, so I know it's not easy because there's homework, after school activities, a whole bunch of stuff, a little bit of socializing, all of that kind of stuff. But probably the number one thing is to get enough sleep, which means going to bed early enough to get that sleep. And I
Yeah.
know that's so much easier said than done, but if there was one thing, I think that would be it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, those are all the questions I had today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and answer these questions. I'll make sure to
Yeah,
link out all the information about you below, and I'm sure everyone listening is just as grateful as I am to have you on here. So thank you again.
yeah, sure. You're very welcome.
Thank you for tuning into the Reward Podcast. Before you go, we'd appreciate your support by subscribing, liking, and leaving your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for our next podcast, where we will be joined by a special guest speaker to explore even more about the fascinating world of sleep and psychology.